I don't know if this is going to be the actual dress in the film. Surely Disney can do better.
Poor, naive, younger Amelia. You were so wrong. Well, hello there. So recently I made a video discussing the costumes in the upcoming Wuthering Heights film as a sort of part one of me redesigning bad Hollywood costumes. And this is, well, part two, where I talk about the new live-action Snow White film from Disney. So it's safe to assume that we all collectively dislike Disney now, or especially the films they've been making in the last few years. As much as I'm sure Disney have always put financial gain at the forefront of everything they do, they definitely seem to be making it more obvious than ever, especially with the way that they treat their creative staff. A recent example is that just before the release of Inside Out 2, Disney had fired 175 employees that had worked on the film just so they wouldn't have to pay them any of the bonuses from the box office earnings, which, to put it softly, is a really sick thing for Disney to do. Knowing that, I can understand a little bit why a lot of the recent Disney films are feeling very lackluster. I mean, would you want to put 110% effort into something that you'd probably get fired for if it actually does well? That's why before the video starts, I wanted to bring up the fact that I don't necessarily put all the blame for Snow White's failings onto the creative team or the actors. Not that they're completely faultless, but I think that perhaps most of the bad decisions of the film came from the producers or the other people at the top of the Disney food chain. So yes, moving on. So it is another day, and as you see, I've left my Victorian mansion to move into a cottage with 7 little people. I also got sent some nice apples from this mysterious old lady, which I'm sure isn't at all suspicious. So if you spend any time on the internet, which I know you do because you wouldn't be watching this video otherwise, then you already know that Disney made a live-action remake of Snow White, and you would also know that everybody hates it. Whether it's because of the songs, the cast, the Uncanny Valley dwarves, the prince/not prince/bandit, the press tour, or even the face that Snow White pulls when the huntsman spares her life. There's something for everyone to dislike, which really isn't that what cinema's for? People from all over the world putting aside their differences and coming together for a common interest. When you think about it like that, Disney actually did something quite beautiful. Sorry, I've just got something in my eye. So I haven't actually watched the new Snow White yet, nor do I really want to, so I can't really give my opinion on the film, even though I have just given my opinion on a film that hasn't even come out yet. But I've seen enough reviews and reaction videos to the film that I feel like I get the gist of it. But I am specifically just going to try and talk about the costumes. The costumes that I will mostly be discussing is Snow White's main dress and also her wedding dress. But before we get started with that, I want to give a special shout out to the other costumes in the film that I don't like. Starting with the Evil Queen. I don't actually know where to start with her costumes. You know, if I had seen them in the Disney park or in a pantomime or even on a cosplay, then I would think they were fun. They were a fun interpretation of the original animated version. But I just think they look so out of place in a film. Between the excessive use of black, the drag makeup, and the heinous costume jewellery, I just think it looks a bit too much. I just think it's a shame that they didn't give her her own unique look, but instead they just made her a carbon copy of her animated counterpart. Which, you know, when Disney first started making the live-action remakes, they were fun because they would be their own unique interpretation of the original. But over the years, they seem to have slowly been stepping away from creativity, which I just think is a bit of a shame. I also don't particularly like the tight wimple around her head. You know, I think maybe it would have been more interesting to see her with just black hair, tied up in various elaborate styles. Now, second is Jonathan, who is Snow White's love interest. Yes, instead of a prince, she got a bandit. And instead of him singing a song about how much he loves Snow White, he sings about how much he hates her because she's a spoiled princess.
princess problems.
Even though she's been forced to be a servant by a stepmother since childhood. I'm also disappointed with his name change. Even though the prince in the original animated film doesn't have a name, he has over the years been officially known as Prince Florian. One, I like the name Florian. I think it's a better, more fairy tale-ish name, but also it could have been the perfect opportunity to finally make that name canon. But no, we got Jonathan, and his costume clashes terribly with Snow White's. It's just me, but they don't even look like they're from the same film. He wears a green hoodie and jeans. And then for his wedding, he wears the exact same outfit, but in white?
You just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine.
Lastly, Snow White's servant dress. Now, I don't hate it, but I just don't particularly like the mismatch of the patterned dress, the patterned underdress, and the patterned apron. I just think it's a tad too much. I know it's probably supposed to be quirky and represent rags, but couldn't they at least have given her just a plain apron? You know, just to make it look a bit more appealing? Which brings me now to Snow White's main dress. And it's terrible. Not just the dress itself, but the shoes and the makeup, and especially the hair. It's like Disney made every unflattering choice that they possibly could. Which is strange, because if there's one character that needs to look their best, it's the main character, especially when that character is a Disney princess. So, breaking it down, she's wearing a long-sleeved blue top and a puffy yellow skirt. Firstly, I don't mind the sleeves too much. I like the shape of them, I just don't like the bodice. The way it just stops in the middle with a thin belt, I think just looks a bit awkward, especially with the puffy skirt. I do think that they should have gone for a shorter, more curved bodice with a slimmer skirt, like the kind you see in Renaissance Italy, or a longer, more pointed bodice with a fuller skirt, like the kind you see in Tudor England. Personally, I would have chosen the former. Now, when we first see Snow White in this dress, she is wearing like a blue overskirt as well, which I think looks better, honestly, because not only does it hide the ugly skirt, but also it makes blue the more dominant colour, and yellow the lesser secondary colour, which I just think is a bit more cohesive than that 50-50 blue and yellow. Which, talking about colour palette, it is horribly oversaturated. It makes the dress look like some sort of children's trick-or-treat costume, and also I just don't think it really suits Rachel Zegler's skin tone. In fact, creator Ellie Jean Royden made an entire video on this subject, so I'll leave that link below if you're interested in watching that. But ironically, in a behind-the-scenes interview, the costume designer Sandy Powell said she especially chose the colours to, one, pay homage to the original animated version, and also to compliment Rachel Zegler.
I did experiments with lots of different blues, lots of different yellows, specifically chosen to suit Rachel. I know when it's the right colour, which is why I'm a bit of a pain.
Neither of which are really true. Firstly, the animated Snow White wears cream and dark blue, not cerulean and butter yellow, and as I just mentioned, it doesn't really compliment Rachel Zegler at all, which I think really makes me believe that Disney executives had a lot of say when it came to the costuming, especially since Sandy Powell was the costume designer for the 2015 Cinderella. You know, that film that has one of the most gorgeous dresses ever created for cinema? Yes, she did that. On the other hand, the costumes in this film just look like they were purely made for marketing purposes, designed specifically to appeal to children through dolls and dress-up gowns. I mean, the live-action and the animated Snow White merchandise is barely distinguishable, and I think that might have been done on purpose. So also Snow White wears So Snow White also wears red ballet slippers with white stockings, which I think looks a little, how do I say this? Goofy? I'm not exactly sure how I would design the shoes, but I don't think I would have done this. I probably would have done some sort of laced up red boot or something. She also wears a very cheap looking heart-shaped necklace, which I believe is a part of the plot. I think her father gives it to her as a gift to remember to be fair, brave, loyal and true, or some adjectives like that. But I think was honestly made just as a marketing gimmick to sell more toys. Her makeup is very simple. Obviously I understand that they want her to look as natural as possible, but I do wish that they had picked a more eye-catching shade of red for her lips, seeing as blood red lips are one of Snow White's token attributes. And finally we come to the hair, and it is awful. A lot of people on the internet keep referring to it as the Farquaad hair, and they're right. I've never seen a more Farquaad looking hairstyle. They've obviously given her a bob to look like the animated Snow White, but the reason Snow White had short hair in the first place was to appeal to the 1930s audience. But like Rachel Zegler infamously said,
it's no longer 1937.
I just think it would have been more appealing for modern audiences to give her longer hair. Again, it would have helped to have given the film a more unique look. The film did try to justify this choice by giving us a scene where the Queen cuts off the child Snow White's hair, presumably out of jealousy, which I do think is a clever addition to the story. I just don't really understand why her hair is still short as an adult. Did it just never grow back, or did the Queen just keep giving her a regular trim every now and then? But whatever the reason, my main question is, why is it brown? What happened to it being ebony black? You hire an actress who has black hair to play a character who has black hair, only to make her a brunette? Why was that decision allowed in the first place? Why was that decision made? Why couldn't they have just used Rachel's real hair? It would have looked so much prettier. Editing Amelia here. So after filming this video, I found out that Rachel Zegler actually had her hair cut especially for the film and doesn't in fact wear a wig most of the time. I think that also explains why her hair is dark brown rather than black, and I think the reason her hair appears to be black in later interviews and pictures is just due to lighting and not that her hair is actually black. I think her hair is dark brown. So, I take it back. It turns out she did need a wig after all. Anyway, I'm going to have a go at designing my own version of Snow White's dress. So, last time I did a Snow White redesign video, I put her in all white, which I still think is a cute idea, but in this video I wanted to design the dress to comply with Disney's wish to stay faithful to the original. So, first things first. Yes, I made her hair long. I just think it looks more fairy tale-y. I didn't want to overuse the colour red, so I just gave her a red ribbon in her hair to give her a sort of whimsy Juliet look. When it comes to the dress, I know Snow White is a princess and is therefore expected to wear a princessy dress. But if she's been wearing rags since she was a child, why would she suddenly change to a fancy gown just to go apple picking? I know I'm not supposed to think like that, but I can't help it. So I wanted to design a dress that still gives her that princessy aura, but simple enough that you could imagine maybe she just secretly whipped it up in her spare time out of some old curtains or something. So I gave her a very short dark blue bodice with long sleeves and a white shift underneath, hence why the puffs on her sleeves are white. Because traditionally puffs aren't actually a part of the dress, but are created by cutting slits in the sleeves and then pulling out the undershift. So I just thought doing it that way would add a touch of historical realness to the garment. I made her skirt a light creamy yellow, and instead of it being lots of layers of organza, I imagine it being perhaps just one layer of some sort of lightweight cotton, maybe. But cut in the shape of a circle skirt so it lays flat normally, but still whooshes out when she's twirling. And that's it. So here's my take on the live action Snow White. I'm not sure if I really love it, but I think it works. I don't know, let me know what you think. Do you like this version or do you prefer the original? Now let's take a look at her wedding dress. At least I think it's her wedding dress. You see, the ending musical is of her and Jonathan and the entire village dancing around and all wearing white. So I can't really tell if it's a wedding or maybe her coronation or just a victory celebration. The film never specifies. Even though I think I might have preferred to see her coronation instead, seeing as a big portion of the storyline is centered around Snow White trying to reclaim her throne from an evil usurper. But I digress. So this dress is basically just everything I disliked about her main dress, but in white. Granted, there are some extra little puffs on her sleeves, but still it is just the same dress, which is a bit boring really. It reminds me how in the Little Mermaid remake, Ariel wears a pink version of the main dress for the ending, which, don't get me wrong, I did really like the dresses in that film. I think they were pretty. I was just a bit disappointed that we didn't get to see Halle Bailey in a nice princessy gown at the end. And really the same for this dress. I think it would have been nice to see something a little different, maybe a bit more queenly. I couldn't actually find any images of the full ensemble, so I don't know what her shoes look like, but I just presume that they're the same ballet slippers, but in white. She wears a little headband, which is very cute, it's very Snow White-esque, but she still has that awful Farquaad bob. Now hear me out. If the Queen had cut Snow White's hair out of jealousy, and to symbolise her overpowering Snow White, wouldn't it have been better to see her hair a bit longer at the end of the film? Maybe a bit fuller and healthier, symbolise her finally being free of the evil queen. It could have also been a way to show that time has gone by and she isn't just marrying a man that she just met. Anyway, for my final redesign, like in my first drawing, I gave Snow White reddish brown lips and rosy blush. I designed her dress to be suitable for both a wedding or a coronation because that's the scene I want to imagine instead of the clappy Greatest Showman scene we got instead. She wears a floaty layered white dress underneath a creamy white, lightly patterned overdress, with red crisscross detailing on the puffs and the bodice part of the underdress, and a long red cape fit for a queen. And finally, once again, her hair is long and styled in a Renaissance-inspired half updo, with pearl detailing going around the back. Looking back though, I would maybe opt out of the pearls and use little white flowers instead, but I'm not sure. I think both work. And this is one way that I would style Snow White for her happily ever after. It's not very practical for stomping and clapping in, but you know, the writers will just have to rewrite the scene, won't they?
But it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
So in conclusion, Snow White 2025 is just another half-baked Disney live action. But I think the reason this one is hated so much more than the others is because it is based off of Disney's first ever animated film. It's the film that not only made Walt Disney Studios what it is today, but it was the first of its kind to really make audiences take notice of animation as a serious art form. So with that in mind, do you think Disney would want to create something that respected and celebrated the original film's legacy? But instead we got this. Now, most of the hate for this film was aimed specifically towards Rachel Zegler, which I do think is unfair. I do think that many of the comments she made at her press tour were incorrect and uncalled for, but to solely blame her for the disgrace of this film is just untrue. It would have still been a flop whether she had played Snow White or not. And you know, she is a brilliant singer, and I think she might have done a good job of Snow White had she been given a better script, better songs, and a better wardrobe. Thank you, Carlson, you saved my life. So, So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to take a bite out of the like and subscribe buttons. I promise they're not poisoned. To join my arty party, the party where only the fairest of the artists are invited. A special shout out to my friend and fellow artist Leah Saneed. We recently did a collaborative painting together, which was really fun to do. And she also has a YouTube channel, so I'll leave a link to it in the description, so make sure you go and subscribe to her. Feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments. And should I do another Hollywood film in the future, what films do you think I should cover next? Also, the algorithm likes it when you comment, so I'm just putting that out there. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye!